Alright, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. I have a number of changes to the Tevesh Szat Rograkh deck, to the Bull Szat deck, and I just want to touch on those and then run through some games. I think I have about 10 games for you. You can see, do a little demonstrating of the power, consistency, and resiliency. Those are the three things that we're looking for foremost in any commander deck, I believe, and I think the 10 games that going to spotlight, which were played today, should do a good job of illustrating where we're at with the current build. So I'm going to bring up this word pad here. I've got a notepad here. I've got a list of things that have been cut and what has gone in to replace them. So this is if you've seen the last video. The following cards are out, and the ones on the left are out, the ones on the right are in. So Batterskull had a purpose in the deck. The purpose was to be able to attack planeswalkers, of course. More importantly, though, it was in there to be able to gain life. I mean, at some point, this deck does quite a bit of damage to itself. I wanted a source of life gain in the deck. That's since been somewhat demonstrated to be not as necessary as I felt that it was initially, and part of that's because I have added life gain to the deck. The reusable life gain in the deck is Sorin the Mirthless. It actually produces, it's the planeswalker that produces a 2/3 vampire with life, flying vampire with lifelink, or if you ultimate it, you can do a 13-point drain life. So the reason for Sorin being superior to Batterskull is that in the very aggressive and brutal cEDH early game in particular, many of your games come down to whether or not one person can stall the other person out and then take advantage of that window of opportunity. And when your opponent's trying to do that to you very aggressively, every draw that you pull really needs to be a card that draws a card, makes mana, or disrupts your opponent. And Batterskull only disrupts your opponent if their game plan is a ground-based attacking game. Like, you know, it can obviously get in the way of a card like Tymna, for example. But because of Tevesh, Szat, and Rog, we actually have a pretty good game already at gumming up the works when it comes to the ground. We have a pretty good ability to just throw blockers almost indefinitely in front of attackers long enough to ultimate Tevesh, for example, and just steal your opponent's commander and win from there, or to protect other planeswalkers and so forth. We also have cards like Brutality, who does a good job of gumming up the ground, and a few other things. So by adding Sorin, we actually get a source of life, which was the purpose of the skull, that provides us with flyers, which can be helpful to go over the top, possibly if the ground is gummed up on both ends, potentially to attack planeswalkers. And more importantly, the card draws cards. So when you're in those like really aggressive early games, everything you draw, it really needs to kind of fit into those three. Does it make mana? Does it make cards? Does it disrupt my opponent? Sorin does a pretty good job of making cards, and a 4-mana investment that draws cards is a very reasonable thing to be playing here, and the fact that it can sometimes gum the works up or protect you or gain life, it's more of a side thing, but it's nice to have. It's a side thing that's good to have in a deck like this. The second card that I've added 2 more cards actually that gain life, but they fit into the same sort of rule set. They also do one of those 3 things, and those cards are Collective Brutality, which you can see here. Card's been in and out of the deck already. It replaced Rack and Ruin. The thing about Rack and Ruin is Rack and Ruin does almost always hit 2 targets, which is great. Collective Brutality very frequently hits 2 targets as well. You often get to take something out of their hand and you get to kill a creature in play with it. You do have to discard an extra card, so you're not 2 for 1ing your opponent, you're 2 for 2ing them. But in terms of tempo, it's roughly about the same, and in terms of disrupting your opponent, being able to, they've invested a card on the board, and they also have something in hand, like if you can kill a Tymna and take a counter spell or a removal out of their hand at the same time as doing that, it's fantastic. If you're not sure what the card does, it's this one here. It's got the Escalate, and of course it does have the ability to gain 2 life. Now, is that gonna matter in games that are 40 life? Most likely not. Even if you play it twice, typically this card isn't going to matter too much in terms of gaining 4 life over the course of a game, drain lifing your opponent for 2. But it does give you a tiny little bit of reach. The opponent's not completely safe against this deck, even though we don't have Lightning Bolt in it. We have a card like that. We have K Command that can also deal 2 damage. We have Chandra, which can direct damage your opponent. Of course, Sorin's ultimate can deal 13, but less worried about ultimates. But just the ability to just kind of sneak a little damage out on a game, and of course there's Death Cloud. In a game where your opponent maybe pays too much life or gets too greedy, too aggressive, say with the Sylvan Library or something like that, is nice. It's nice to have that, and of course we can replay cards pretty well with Yogg Will and Underworld Breach. So, potentially, doming them for 4 here and maybe 4 here could amount to something. But mainly, as I said, it's in there because it's disruption that can be a multi-target spell. So why did I take out Rack and Ruin? Well, I love Rack and Ruin. I want Rack and Ruin in the deck. I feel like Rack and Ruin is at its best when you're facing the best type of opponents. But it isn't everything. There are definitely combo decks out there. Sometimes what you can do is maybe you can't stop the mana right away, but you can disrupt the payout card with your discard and buy time, and then kill their artifact mana. And so that's kind of the idea here. We're going to use Brutality to force through the spells that we need to resolve, in theory, and then with those key spells, like for example, if you have Rack and Ruin and Fiery Confluence, and you play the Rack and Ruin and it resolves, great. But now your Fiery Confluence is not doing as much. If you have Brutality and Confluence, you play the Brutality and it resolves, great. You get to take a card, maybe take the counter out of their hand or whatever, and then play the Fiery Confluence is just a little bit better in cases like that. So whether or not it makes more sense long term to run Rack and Ruin again remains to be seen. It is a fantastic card in here, but it doesn't feel like we're completely foolishly weak by not playing it. There are still many shatters in here, right? We still have By Force. We still have Vandal Blast, we have Shattering Spree, we have Fiery Confluence. That's 4 cards that can kill many artifacts. Maybe we don't need a 5th. Not to mention, of course, the Ready, K Command, Braid. Like, we have a lot of artifact removal. Plus, we have Karn, who can just shut most of the artifacts that matter off from working in general. Maybe not a Crucible, but most things, right? So there's so much mass artifact kill in here. It's possible that we just don't need I guess it would be a 6th effect like that. And Brutality is just a little bit better. With that in mind, I've also added, as I said, you can see I substitute Batterskull with Grief, and I went ahead and took out a Swamp and put it on Mask. These are 2 cards that cost 0 to play most of the time. You just pitch a card. What I kind of realized is that cards like this, where you exile a card and then you duress your opponent, or you Thoughtseize your opponent rather, or Grief, where you exile a card and you Thoughtseize your opponent, or in the case of Grief, where you can actually cast it for 4 mana and pressure something. You can pressure the board. The card actually has Menace, so it's actually kind of hard to block. So you can pressure Planeswalkers with it while taking the removal that they might use to address it out of their hand, or whatever it is that they might do about it. So running these sort of pitch Thoughtseizes, essentially, having more of them is it's Black's version of running Force of Will, right? So if you could run 2 Force of Wills, you would run 2 Force of Wills. We can't, obviously, but Black comes pretty close with these pitch Thoughtseizes, where, yes, if you're going second and your opponent ramps out a Soul Ring, these cards don't help you. But if you're going first and you take the Soul Ring out of the hand, then they do. Functionally, Force of Will, just without the timing ability that Blue has. On the other hand, though, you can be pretty aggressive with these because you can play them early. Unlike Force of Will, and these provide information to you, so they let you look at your opponent's hand. That information can change how you deploy the rest of your hand, and that can change the course of a game, just having that knowledge. So there is something to be said, like, it's not a direct Force of Will replacement, but we're not going to get that without playing Blue. And this is about as close as it gets, I think, and seems to be working out pretty well. The next change was that I wanted more life gain, more than just like these little sort of piddly life gains cards, and but I wanted it to follow one of the rules of card draw, disruption, or mana production. And I found this card. I had forgotten about this card. It's from 5th Dawn, so Plunge into Darkness. It's an instant that For black and 1, you can pay X life and look at the top cards of your library, put one in your hand, exile the rest, or sack any number of creatures, gain 3 life for each sacrificed creature. And what this card basically functions like is essentially like an impulse. So this is taking some of the sting out of the fact that I did cut 2 lands. I'll get to the rest of that in a second. But this allows you, if you cut lands and you add you add mana sources and cantrips, generally you're okay. But Plunge has a couple of interesting things that it can do. So black 1, you get to do both. The card's other ability is to sacrifice any number of creatures and gain 3 life for each. So early on, you could potentially plunge, pay like 10 life, find a way to cheat or ramp out Tevesh Szat way before it should be. So turn 2, end your turn, plunge for a giant look at my deck, pull out the best card, untap, play my land, probably play my commander, right? So there's that, and then at a certain point in the game, you can frequently get into a position where you have multiple tokens and Rog and stuff like that in play. And so not only can you plunge again in order to draw more cards, but you can also potentially pay the kicker or the entwine cost. Black 1 would be the total cost of the spell, and just sacrifice your creatures and gain life, 3 per, which can be pretty significant. The fact that Tevesh Szat and Duretti and so forth are pumping out all these extra life gain cards. It is an instant too, by the way, so you can put like Grief on the stack. Like, say you play a Grief and then it's going to die, you can plunge and sack it if you want to, if that seems like something you need to do. But yeah, overall, it's just one of those deals where out of nowhere you can gain so much life that a game that looked really close or that your opponent was planning to win via direct damage or mana crypt coin flips or something nasty like Price of Progress, probably isn't going to happen if you have this card available, because you're just going to gain a boatload of life and completely counteract that kind of a strategy. It's a single card that can potentially undo every lightning bolt you take. Every lightning bolt your opponent aims at your opponent's head, or at your head, for example. This card essentially counterspells retroactively, right? And the fact that you can replay it from the graveyard's, interesting as well. So you can usually the play pattern with this card is early on you use it to get mana or disruption, and then later on, towards the end of the game, you replay it just to seal the game away. You're down to 8 life or whatever, and you just suddenly jump up to 24, and then the opponent concedes, right, and draw a card in the process, right? So if you're worried about exiling. Remember, you exile the rest of the cards. Unfortunately, it's not a full impulse. You don't put them on the bottom of your library. But if you're worried about it, you can always just plunge and pay a relatively small amount of life. Typically, you can afford to exile lots of cards in this deck because it has so much redundancy. There are very few cards that, if you exile them, you can't get the effect elsewhere. So in general, not a big deal. Lastly, a card that Brian had suggested, and originally we were talking about taking out Worn Powerstone, mainly because it's a little bit slow. And so we originally were testing out, Weissman had suggested running the Everflowing Chalice. And Everflowing Chalice is this guy here. And it's a really interesting card, actually. I realized after he mentioned it once, and I kind of was like, nah, I was still in the middle of early phase of this deck. And then later he mentioned it a second time, and I thought, yeah, let me think about that a little bit harder. He's mentioned it twice, and that's usually a sign I should think about it. And as it turns out, I'm pretty sure the card's going to stay in the deck. The thing about it is that you can invest temporary mana, which we can produce a fair bit of, and turn it into permanent mana. And it just has a really good, 2 mana for an untapped artifact that taps for mana immediately is a perfectly fine card to play. 4 mana for a slightly weaker Thran Dynamo is still a reasonable card to play, and it curves very well. Like if you have like 2 mana, or heck, if you have just 1 mana left over for the turn, you put 2 into this thing, and then you get 1 back. So it makes it smoother to kind of curve and use all of your mana productively each turn, and I think that's pretty important. It's also a card that allows you to keep a hand. Like imagine you have first turn City of Traders, no other land, right? but you have a fairly decent hand regardless. You could keep like on a City of Traders Everflowing Chalice hand where you play the Chalice immediately, and then somehow use like maybe on the next turn use Chalice to play like Coalition Relic or whatever. So there are things that just having additional mana sources like that is pretty good, and of course, it's another payout for Workshop. It's a little awkward because you can't Workshop into 2 mana on turn 1 with the Chalice. I mean, unless you have, say, Mox Amber or one of the other cards to go with it. But just the ability to quickly transform unflexible Workshop mana into highly flexible colorless is excellent. And the ability to just drop it on turn 2 and use it in conjunction with the Workshop as a 4-drop rather than a 2-drop is pretty valuable. And with that in mind, the reason that I did not cut Worn Powerstone and am resistant to it is because any hand, Worn Powerstone is one of those cards that it rewards you for drawing Dark Ritual, it rewards you for drawing Calling the Weak, it rewards you for drawing Workshop, it rewards you for drawing Ancient Tomb, it rewards you for drawing City of Traders, right? Like, provided you have one other mana to go with the 2 mana production cards, the cards that produce 2, but the ability to this card just, it's not great kind of mid game where you've got other things to do. I mean, at least with a Chalice, like you get the mana back immediately. Same with all these other investments. Worn Powerstone's very clunky kind of mid game, but what it does is it just gives you more high end potential for ridiculous starts. And I think that we really want to maximize the potential for gross starts in this deck, and it's worth kind of diminishing the mid game somewhat in order to have that. It also being a singular card that produces 2 mana, Soul Ring, once it starts working, it also has it provides you some additional resiliency in the face of disruption. A lot of times, you get partway through the game and you've been holding it because you don't really have like a good opportunity to play it. Because you've been holding it, your opponent then, maybe they blow you out with a Vandal Blast, and then you just follow up with a Worn Powerstone, and maybe all you have is 3 lands at that point, but now you're back to 5, and then boom, you're back to 6, you're back in the game. So the card's good for that. Also, you can just hold it as an insurance policy sometimes if you suspect that something like that might happen, and that can be good as well. Incidentally, the other reason that I'm really excited about Everflowing Chalice is because it, as well as Worn Powerstone, frankly, is because both of these cards, if you hit them on a Jeska's Will, it's a very good thing, right? You Jeska's early on, and sometimes you just get a ton of mana, and being able to pour all that into like a Chalice or a Worn Powerstone so that now you have mana advantage for the rest of the game, until they deal with it at least, is a pretty big deal. So those are the changes, those are the reasons. Again, this is what came out from the last video on the left. This is what came in, so if you wanted to follow along and make the changes, that's how you do it. So next thing I'm going to do is run through some games, and we'll start here. You can see results on, but 10 for 10 so far today. I just played a handful of games this morning for a few hours, and then want to do some other things with my time, but yeah, so we'll run through this, and I'm going to just turn off the chat, because in some of these games people got a little salty, and honestly it just doesn't bear worrying too much about the complaints. Alright, so I'll put my component's commander here, we'll put mine up here, so you can see this opening hand. This is a perfectly mediocre hand, right? We have no acceleration, we don't really have a game plan, we have no disruption. This hand this isn't not what a keep looks like. Despite in other decks maybe having 2 lands and a planeswalker on 3 is a thing you keep. This deck, this is too slow and too fair and just does nothing. We mulligan this hand every day. So here's a hand, on the other hand, much better. You'll see the value of grief in this turn. So with this hand, we can definitely keep Breach. Not great, is just like Yawgmoth's Will. If you mulligan into them, often they're the cards that you pitch, that you send back into your deck so that you can draw them later when you have a nice fat graveyard and get a lot of value out of it. That's going to be the same thing we do here, so Breach will go away. We end up with this really nice hand here. So, and going first as well, which is as you'll see, quite important. So we get to lead off. If you get the choice of leading off with like Disruption or Mana Acceleration, even though I could get my commander on turn 2, almost 100%, even though I could Grief here and then Mana Vault, I'm pretty confident that for the most part you want to Duress first, especially against a deck like Urza, because the best draws for them involve like Mana Crypt and Urza coming down on turn 1, and you do not want that, right? So we want to get into the opponent's hand and go after their Soul Rings early on, so that I make that play there. And no Soul Ring here, but look at this nasty hand from my opponent. I mean, this is gross. Mishra's Workshop and a Trinisphere. Super, super brutal. Also, Rapid Hybridization, not too worried about. Proteus Staff, not worried about unless it gets out of hand. Wash Away, scary card as well. If I had gone for first turn Mana Vault and my opponent goes first turn Trinisphere, I could just play second turn Tevesh Szat, no problem. But if I go first turn Mana Vault, my opponent goes first turn Island Go, and I don't Duress them, and I go second turn Land Tevesh Szat, they wash away to counter the spell, so it wasn't cast from my hand. And then on their turn, they Trinisphere me, and I probably just lose. So the Duress works out. I mean, obviously I could Grief there, but we don't want to throw a Necropotence away with Grief if we can help it. So we're going to take the Trinisphere out of our hand. I know I've got the Wash Away. You know, it's a better the devil you know type situation. We can play around this because sure, Wash Away will protect my opponent from my commander as long as they leave a blue untapped, but it won't protect them from Necro. So that just flips the script on what the game plan is here. All right, so opponent draws and plays Island, and then nothing. Okay, so that's kind of exactly what. So they've got one card in hand we don't know about. So Opposition Agent here, very welcome because it's black, and I can pitch it to Grief. And so we're going to go ahead and just play this Mana Vault here and threaten to get the commander into play. This also gives us the ability to flash out Opposition Agent if the opponent's next play is like a fetch land or something, or maybe they Mystical Tutor or something like that. We don't know what their top card was. Apparently it was Opt, so they're going to scry and then we're going to see what happens next. All right, so they scryed into an Opal or drew an Opal. So Opal's down, Workshop's down. We can check that off. And I'm like, oh boy, this could get bad fast. Luckily, it's just the Proteus Staff, so we can check that off. Okay. And from here, no searching over there, and they don't have two blues, so this is a good. Well, hopefully I don't get stifled. We don't know what the last card is, but we'll go ahead and fetch Yard Mesa and get the tapped Smoldering Marsh. We're playing Smoldering Marsh over the Snowland because the Snowland was just a bad choice on my part. The next best land to play would be the black-red Swamp Mountain that cycles for 2 mana. And then the best land to play, I think, is Smoldering Marsh. The reason is very rare. We're going to be cycling mana, but on the other hand, we do have 4 basics and a lot of search, and so we can intentionally search for basics and often are happy to search for a snow-covered swamp, which means this has the potential of coming into play untapped in a game, and a land that might come into play untapped is better than a land that you might cycle because this is a tempo deck, so we care much more about tempo than we do about flexibility like that. So all right, we'll let the Mana Vault go. Lots of interesting plays it could make here, so we could Grief and then play the commander, but and that was what I was thinking was going to happen. You know, Grief them, play the commander, take the Wash Away, right? We don't know what the 4th card is, but I top deck a Swamp here, beautiful. So I want to get the Necro into play, and apparently they have no way. Wash Away won't counter that, so it looks like I can't think of a blue card that could counter the Necro. Like even if it was Spell Pierce, I can just pay the mana, right? But why take chances? Why take chances? Let's go ahead and just Grief them anyway. And here you can see the value of this is like Force of Will, right? Preemptive Force of Will. So we'll just run that out and look what they drew. Swan Song. If I'd have gone for the Necro, once again, the discard doing what it's supposed to do, but being able to play it for 0 here, just so valuable. So yeah, goodbye Swan Song. So they're back to the cards that we know they have. Also Grief, by the way, because it I gotta let it die first. Because Grief goes in the graveyard, it actually it's really nice in that it puts additional cards in your graveyard for no mana, and that can be helpful because of Cabal Ritual, and it can be helpful because of cards like Yogg Will down the road. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and slam Necro now. Opponent cannot wash that away, and instead we get to Necro for 7. I go ahead and play Rog here because I might draw the free commander counter or the deflection or something along those lines. I don't know what I'm going to draw, so get the Rog out now. And if my opponent wants to wash away this 0 drop, have at it. My opponent's not that foolish, but draws their card for the turn and realizes they're not beating a Necro. And obviously they're not. I mean, if they play Buried Ruin here, they don't have much else going. I mean, we get to waste the Workshop or the Buried Ruin. We get to Thoughtseize. Most likely the Workshop's too dangerous, so we just waste the Workshop, Thoughtseize the opponent, dump some more mana into play, and just refill the hand again. Eventually going to overwhelm the opponent, so they just give up before waiting to see that happen. So awesome stuff. And there you get to see Grief in action. All right. Here we go. AKA Black Force of Will. All right, we're playing against Blakey Lawson running Maelstrom Wanderer, and here's a hand where I'm like, unfortunately my opponent's going first, or no, let me take that back. We both rolled 6, and then we both rolled 1, and then I'm pretty sure that at the end of this whole thing my opponent's going first, which ends up being I'm going to, let's see if I can turn. Is there something I can do about that? There we go, about that glare. I'm gonna have to like kind of lean over in a weird way to block it. Anyhow, so the opponent did win the die roll. Jessica's Will just a little bit weaker. Of course, you can see Chalice here really nice because I can land Chalice, and then from there I know I have 3 mana for the Will. So the fact that this is in the deck here versus it being land, not super relevant unless I draw a land, right? Like, so if I go land, and then this were just a land, I could just play it. But if I draw a land between then and now, it gets a little more interesting. Certainly if I draw like a Crypt or something where I can shove Jessica's Will mana into it or whatever, that's also quite interesting. But we'll see how this plays out. So opponent leads with an island and top deck a land. So now the Chalice is actually better than a land because I can play it 1 turn earlier and I still have the mana to make my land drop. So I'll go ahead and play Verdant here and pass. Opponent has a Forest and then plays Groll Signet, which is of course making my opponent's hand smaller, which is, you know, not what I want when I have a Will in my hand. But here you can see this is interesting. So I top deck, I make a small misplay here, I'll point out in a second. But anyway, I top deck a Demonic Tutor, and now Chalice actually is valuable for a different reason. So I get to small misplay. Should have played a Mountain here. I already had black. I get to go get Mana Crypt though, and then I can just run the Chalice out, which is really nice. Just being able to get all that. Now I have my commander next turn, even if my opponent has like a Wasteland. I mean, if I want it. There are things I could be doing otherwise. Alright, opponent plays a Beanstalk Giant or Fertile Footstep. Search a land for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle, and then they've got this giant that they can play later. So go ahead and just like kind of, I don't know, put that somewhere, put that over there. Alright. And my opponent only has 4 cards in hand now, so they are, however, conspicuously leaving up double blues. So I need to figure out what spell can I play that will encourage them to counter, but I don't necessarily mind if it gets countered. And I decide that that would be Jessica's Will. I don't think that my opponent can allow me to generate, you know, get 4 mana and essentially draw 3 cards. I don't think they'll tolerate that. So I go for Rograkh first, just to see what will happen here. And also, you never know what the top card will be. Plus, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get my commander into play this turn, one way or the other. So I go for Jessica's, and sure enough, my opponent does have a counter. Unfortunately for me, it's Mana Drain, and this Maelstrom Wanderer, which normally isn't that big of a deal, is now a big threat. But I have to proceed with my turn apace. So I'm going to go ahead and just play the Mana Vault, and then after thinking about it, I realized I would rather play Gilded Lotus here than play my commander. And the reason is I'm expecting Maelstrom Wanderer to come down. Maelstrom Wanderer will gives creatures haste, and if my opponent hits multiple creatures, if I have my commander down, it can my opponent can play their commander and multiple creatures and send them at my commander. So I would have, you know, some blockers here, perhaps. But I feel much better with this because next turn this gives me the mana where my opponent invests in Maelstrom Wanderer, and then I can use my mana to kill it, possibly play my commander, and then I feel a lot safer in that under those circumstances. Of course, if my opponent has, you know, Vandal Blast, this is a blowout, but I've got to risk it. All right, so my opponent brainstorms, which is unfortunate. They get to set up exactly whatever it is that they want to see on the top of their library. And what they decide to cascade into ends up being pretty gnarly. Let's go. First card is Avenger of Zendikar and a forest. So Avenger of Zendikar. So they got rid of a forest that was in their hand and turned it into an Avenger of Zendikar, basically. And then Thran Dynamo. So annoying, because that means that if I kill the commander, which I'm kind of going to have to do, it gets to do this again. This is a little bit problematic. Now the Avenger creating plant tokens is actually quite scary. Fortunately, my opponent hit a land drop, but if they had not used a land drop this turn, and this is what happened, and I had my commander out, then all these, because remember, everything gets haste in a second. So if my opponent had not burned a land drop, I would have lost my commander here, and I wouldn't have the Lotus in play, and I'd be much worse off. So I was pretty pleased that I made this choice here. And since we're planning to sweep the board, let's go ahead and save myself 7 life. Put Rog in the sideboard there, or in the command zone. All right, for the turn, I'll go ahead and just take some damage here. And we're going to clear the board. I drew a Torque, so I get to run the Torque into Tevesh Szat, plus it up. And unfortunately, there's going to be another round of Maelstrom. But at least I have, you know, 2 blockers, and we have seen a very good one that my opponent was able to set up with the Brainstorm. Hopefully it won't be quite so bad. We'll see, though. We'll see. Thankfully, it doesn't give everything trample. I think the card would be pretty frustrating if it did. I think it'd be actually dumb as heck. Anyway, opponent hits more mana sources, and that's not great because if I kill it, they just get to do it again. But nothing makes me kill it. I have chumps. As long as I can do the chump block thing, and then opponent plays a Arcane Signet from hand, then I can stall, and stalling might be good enough. So for my turn, I'm going to go ahead and untap Mana Vault, draw. Bear in mind that they have this giant that they can play, and that thing's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Its power and toughness are equal number of lands they control, so they can play it and attack with haste. So I have to be cognizant of that. Fortunately, I drew an Imperial Seal though, so I can seal a card directly into my hand. So I think about, well, you know, what do I want? And I should probably give you a moment to take a look at the deck list and see if you can figure out what it is I Imperial Sealed for in this board state. I'm going to go back to it. And so yeah, so I go ahead and Tevesh Szat here. And the card that I Imperial Sealed for was Vandal Blast, actually. So what I realized was that if I Vandal Blast, my opponent really won't have a lot of mana. This Beanstalk Giant's a lot less threatening if it doesn't have haste. And if I VB all this stuff off the board and then kill their Maelstrom, it's a long time before they can play it again. And maybe some of these like big bombs won't even come down. So that's what I'm planning to do. So rather than waste a Feed the Swarm on this thing, I have just enough mana to make it an artifact creature and Vandal Blast the whole board away like that. I still have a blocker if something with haste does manage to come into play. And I have Feed the Swarm, so if my opponent follows up with their giant, I can just kill it and carry on with my turn. All right, so my opponent's turn, they run out Hedron Archive. And I believe this game's going to bug. I think I reviewed this one, and it does bug out here. I don't draw Prismatic Vista. I draw actually, I don't actually have these 2 cards in hand. These 3 cards are all bugged. Everything up here up to now is correct, and the Swarm is correct. But actually what I have in hand here is Karn. So I end up playing Karn here. And my opponent does not sack the Archive in response. And yeah, I don't know what the game's going to do. Anyway, We'll move on to the next one, but basically, I get Karn down. Opponent doesn't sack in response. I start the card drawing engine going, and a turn or two later, I think I get Sorin. It was Sorin and Karn is what I ended up doing. Make a vampire, lock this thing down, and I can't remember how the game ends, but I'm pretty sure it ends on a big death cloud at some point because my opponent's building up their mana base, and then eventually I blow the cloud, and my opponent's left with no prominence, right? So I do seem to recall at that game I actually had to use Karn on my own mana crypt in order to make it a creature and kill it because my life was getting very low. I don't know if you noticed it was pretty low that game. And actually after that play and then I played the Death Cloud for enough to kill all of my opponent's lands, I was actually at 2. And in that game I attacked with the vampire exactly 1 time. So funny enough, it was the 2 life that I gained that made all the difference in that game. In terms of, I would have allowed my opponent to have an extra land if I didn't have the life, but it was nice. It was nice to have that. All right, so here's a game against Hash1, definitely a cEDH player, and he's running classical nightmare combo of Crom and Tymna and Crom. But I have a very good start here, so we're going to keep, and importantly, my opponent rolled a 1 on the die, and I rolled a 2. So I'm going to lead off with Cliffs, play Rog, and see if this Calling the Weak sticks. And if it does, we're in business, and it does. So I get to start with a Thoughtseize, and here's what we see. Silence, Tainted Pact, Consult, Fire Covenant, Gamble, Steamvent, Scrubland. This is incredibly scary because obviously with both Tainted Pact and Consult in hand like that and Silence, the deck is running the combo of the blue creature who, when you have no cards in your library, you win the game. That thing combined with Demonic Consultation means my opponent can win the game as early as turn 3. And with my opponent having, well actually they can win on turn 1 with that combo, but given my opponent's hand it would be most likely turn 3. But with Consult and that creature, they just need blue, black. They have blue and black already, so literally 1 blue. And with Tainted Pact in his hand, my opponent can Tainted Pact right straight to the creature. And then, so all they have to do is draw a land over the next 2 turns, Tainted Pact, go get that dumb creature, and then Demonic Consult and kill me. And because I'm not playing blue, there's no way for me to stop it unless I strip away the components and attack their mana and get at them quickly, because otherwise I'm in deep trouble here. So I'm going to attack. It's weird and I hate to do it, but I'm gonna actually take out the Demonic Consultation because it allows my opponent to combo off the cheapest. Even though Tainted Pact is like the setup card, there are a lot of ways my opponent could set up, but in order to combo out, they need 3 mana and with Consult, or 4 with Pact. And so I think giving them a combo that costs 3 mana is pretty dumb when I can make it cost 1 more, basically forcing them to use Pact instead of Consult. So I go that route, take out the DC, the Demonic Consult there. And with 3 mana floating, all right, down comes the Crypt, and boom, Commander, make some dorks and pass. Of course, I used Rog for the sacrifice, so I can't do much else here. Now I'm fully expecting my opponent to run out Steam Vents into Gamble. Very surprised when I see him play the Scrubland here. Turns out they top decked a Mana Vault. Oh gosh. So not the worst thing in the world, but definitely not something that I'm pleased to see on my opponent's side of the board. Fortunately, we've got some artifact removal here, so let's see what we do with that over the next few turns. Draw Necro, not immediately helpful. I'm going to go ahead and just play Rog here and then sack. I really want to hit a land and by force that Mana Vault. So I figured rather than drawing 2 and then by forcing it as a guaranteed thing, I would take a little bit of risk and draw 3 and expect myself to draw some mana within the top 3 because I really want to hit a land drop here, right? So I go ahead and sack Rog here. Luckily, I do hand a very nice card here, and it's questionable about how I play this turn. So I go fetch Badlands. I could, if you look at it, I could Yawg Will here. I could Dark Ritual, Yawgmoth's Will, then flashback, Dark Ritual, Calling the Weak, Thought Seize my opponent again and slam a Necro down. But I would be allowing them to keep the Mana Vault, and if I wait just one turn, provided my opponent doesn't make me discard, then I can do all that while also hitting a land drop from the graveyard. And that seems just a little bit better. And also take away their Mana Vault now. So with all that in mind, I decide I'm going to wait. Now the risk here is, of course, if they silence me during upkeep, the next turn is not good for me, right? But it's also not great for my opponent because I have an active Tevesh Szat. And so if they do use a turn to make me do nothing except activate Tevesh Szat, that might ultimately result in them losing as well. So I figure I'm going to take a risk. Plus, I'm fully expecting them to gamble, and we don't know what card they're going to get and what they're going to discard. And if it turns out that they go get like Crypt, which is what I'm expecting, possibly Crypt, or maybe they should just gamble for the combo card to go with Tainted Pact. But I figure they'll probably get like Soul Ring or Crypt. And if they do that, then the Yogg Will play gets even more valuable because of the Byforce in the graveyard. So for all those reasons, I wait. They do gamble. We know what's in their hand. And they end up hitting Silence. So they're holding Tainted Pact, Fire Covenant, probably Mana Crypt, and then an Unknown. Alright, so the opponent doesn't make a play this turn, but does not have Silence here, which is pretty good for me. And I drew a Vault of Whispers, but I'm definitely going to go for the Yogg Will play here. So the only question is how to do it. First thing I think that makes sense is just grab some cards. That'll increase my knowledge of what I have and help me make a better decision. So I draw. I'm confident this is also a bug game. If I otherwise I would have played the Mox Diamond here 100%. So this game's bugged out on those last few cards. But anyway, I'm going to Dark Ritual here and go for it. So I Yogg Will, and it sticks, which is what we expected, which means I get to Dark Ritual again, Calling the Weak. I now have 7 mana floating. I get to play a land, Thought Seize my opponent, and look at that, Underworld Breach, Tainted Pact, Fire Covenant, and a land. That's gross. So they do have, so I take Underworld Breach, and that leaves them with land, Pact, Covenant, which means that they can put together, so with the land, they actually can put together the, they can get the 2/1 creature, and then 1 more mana, they can Pact and do the full combo. So we have to continue to dig in here. Before I can continue, though, my opponent actually concedes. I guess they felt like the disruption was a bit much. I'm pretty sure that, I don't know what the other 2 cards were, but I know that one of them was something I was going to cast. It was a permanent that was going to come down. And the other one was going to be, the other play was going to be Necro. And unfortunately, Commander Bug strikes again, but my opponent conceded that turn either way. So next is XPTS Ox Bugs. And this opponent is playing Urza, High Lord Artificer again. And I've got a nice hand. I get to disrupt. I get to potentially, disrupt hard. I get to remove an Urza as it, before it triggers the creating the token. This looks solid. This is definitely a keep. My opponent mulligans and my opponent concedes. So sad. I was going to go first. If my opponent had kept, obviously we duress and see what's going on over there and then take it from there. But that was a very good, very good disruptive hand there. Looked good. I'm sure that game would have been fine. So next is Truckee 333. And this opponent's playing Teferi, and Teferi is yet another mono blue commander that loves its artifacts. I don't have, directly speaking, I don't have artifact removal in this hand, but I do have a fast hand. It's just a little challenging because it's like I don't want to imprint a Vampiric Tutor. I don't want to imprint a Dark Confidant. Now I'm going second, so I this is a keep, but I'm really, really hoping. And it's funny, I was sitting here saying, "Come on, just draw. Don't draw a land. Just draw like a non-artifact. Just draw a spell, right? Just draw a spell. That's all I want to do." And my opponent is puking mana out everywhere on turn 1. Give me a spell. I wasn't specific enough. I get Deflecting Swat, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to. I need Swat against this opponent. I don't want to. Shoot, man. I don't want to imprint a Deflecting Swat, so I decide to do this. I'm going to play Rog so that I have it up. Go ahead and fetch here. for Badlands. Play a Chrome Mox. Oh my goodness, it's getting so loud outside. Sorry, my neighbors are... I'm going to take care of a few... I'll be right back. I'm going to take care of the light and the neighbors. Or rather the noise. I'm not going to take care of the neighbors. Well, it's not perfect, but it should help a little bit. Okay, so I decided to imprint Dark Confidant. The reason is that the curve, right? So I want to curve down into the Talisman and then be able to Vampiric Tutor here. And no, I cannot Vandal Blast, but this deck has like a bunch of Vandal Blasts effectively, right? So we have Karn, Fiery Confluence, we have Shattering Spree. So I can go get any of those cards here and be pretty set. And it doesn't look like my opponent can play Teferi next turn, because if they have, even if they have Ancient Tomb, they're still missing a blue, provided they don't have like Tomb, Opal, or Mox Opal, and a land essentially would be bad news. But outside of a card that produces blue, Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, something like that, should be pretty safe here. Yeah, I'm sorry for the noise here. My neighbors just, they work on cars and they work on sound systems for cars, and they test them. So, and at least they're good. They test them during the day. They don't test them late at night or anything. But just one of the deals of living here. All right, so opponent runs out a Chalice on 2 and a Wasteland. And I'm so sad here because, well, first of all, if that had been a Strip Mine, I could Deflecting Swat it back to their island and just crush my opponent, right? But the other problem here is that if they Wasteland, I can't play any of those 4 mana solutions that I want to run out, right? I wanted to run Karn or as soon as I saw this, I was like drooling, because it's like, oh man, I can just play Fiery Confluence and just bang, 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 right? Just win the game. But with that Wasteland play, I'm set back, and if I don't do something here, my opponent's going to have to Teferi down, and then I probably lose. All right. Fortunately, there are options. So we'll go ahead and Vamp Tutor here and go get the next best thing. In hindsight, well, not in hindsight, but it looks like from this position, of course, the card I got was, there's no Rack and Ruin, but there is a Shattering Spree, so I got Shattering Spree. Of course, if I had imprinted Deflecting Swat here, I would still have my Confidant, and I'd have 3 red, and I could just go pop, pop, pop. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to make do with just 2. But I think it should be good enough. I mean, I'm destroying 4 mana here. I just go ahead and get basic Swamp here, basic Mountain here, to play it relatively safe. And bang, bang, and my opponent concedes. So, you know, they're left with Mindstone Island and 3 cards in hand, and I've got Deflecting Swat ready to protect my commander play when I get to it, and I'm a mana in hand and a land away from taking over this game, and I just love that. It's just so nice. So even though, you know, I don't have as much artifact removal as I had before, it's mostly okay, at least in that game. All right, Cortez KK is the next opponent, I believe. And this opponent is running Lord Xander the Collector, a card I had never seen this card before, so I had to sit and parse it for a little while. Basically, if this commander gets cast, you probably win. But if it attacks, yeah, if the commander gets cast, for the most part, the caster of the commander probably wins. But it is 7 mana. Of course, it didn't stop the Maelstrom Pulse deck, a Wanderer deck, so we'll see what we can do here. But my opponent does mulligan, which is always good. Another reason why these black disruptive cards are just so powerful is they punish mulligans very hard. And I'm going first again, fortunately, also. So we'll go ahead and run out an Inquisition straight away. And we see Lightning Greaves, Hymn to Torok. So good for the goose, good for the gander, right? So I'm going to take, obviously, the Hymn to Torok. I don't want to get hymned. And I don't have a Deflecting Swat in my hand. Opponent has, which will leave them with some mana and a Greaves. So we'll just leave this up. I'm not super worried about the Greaves if the plan is to put it on the commander. The intent is to keep them from ever getting there. I am keeping in mind that I really would like to see, I expect them to use Scalding Tarn right away. But if they don't, and I can get up enough mana, there's a chance I can Opposition Agent that. So that's something to keep in mind. They don't lead off with it. They start with Swamp. So, okay. All right, I've got Brutality, but we've already seen their hand. So unless anything major's changed, I know that I don't particularly have to worry about what's in their hand. So I'm just going to play the Torque here. Hope to set up for the agent. Maybe they play the fetch land and they don't fetch till the end of my turn, and I can break them off with the agent. Also, holding the Brutality means that if they drew like a Dark Confidant or something, I can just deal with it immediately. So I'll go ahead and fetch out a Badlands and play the Torque and pass. Opponent does not, so they drew an island somewhere in there, does not play their fetch land again. Now they've got 2 basics for their Smoldering Marsh, so this does make sense. They play their Greaves, so we can check that off the list. Oh, Vandal Blast, very nice. I'll play an untapped, or no, rather a tapped Shatter Skull here. I could have played it untapped and then played like Relic, Duress, or whatever, but I'm expecting Smoldering Marsh to come down next turn, but I'm expecting Tarn to come down at some point here. And I'd really like to flash out this Opposition Agent. Also, of course, they're playing black and blue, so they could Demonic Tutor. There's a lot of things that could happen. Instead, they play a Foreboding Ruins. So they, are playing lands that I don't know about, which means I know more cards in their hand because they're not playing cards that they actually have. And they choose to reveal Blood Crypt to me, which means I literally know the entire contents of their hand. This is not good magic right here. Unfortunately, that's bad choices. You don't want to give your opponent that kind of information. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just, because I have better things to do with my mana over the next few turns than sit on an opposition agent indefinitely, I'm just going to flash it out there. It means that they're Scalding Tarn. I'm not going to get to trick them with that, but they've got lots of land drops and they don't seem particularly inclined to use their fetch. This will at least prevent them from using it until they address that issue. My top deck Mana Crypt, fantastic. And here we go. And the party starts. All right, and I have not actually played a land drop yet, so I'll go ahead and just play Ancient Tomb here. Play a Mana Vault. Tap it for 3. Play a Coalition Relic. I've got 1 colorless floating, so I can actually tap black, black. Play Liliana. And, I can give up the Collective Brutality. I don't see anything over here. If they do play Dark Confidant, I can kill it with Liliana. So yeah, I can throw away the discard spell to make my opponent discard right here. So that's what we'll do. Throw away the Brutality, and then we'll see what we can check off. And of course, my opponent is not a crazy person. They discard Scalding Tarn with the Opposition Agent in play. Darn near 100% certainty that's what they would do there. I'm going to leave Opposition Agent back. I don't want him to play a Confidant and then swing it and take 2 counters off Liliana. I will trade an Opposition Agent, knowing that they literally have no way to search at them, or no search cards in their hand at the moment, and worry about the future later if they were to draw something like that. They play an untapped Crypt and just make the play that I'm expecting. This is also why I'm holding the Vandal Blast. Or so I think. I don't know what went on here, but somehow my opponent plays Spark Double, which is a clone, but it's a clone that only copies creatures or planeswalkers you control. It doesn't copy your opponent's stuff. I don't know if they misclicked here and they meant to play the Archive or whatever, but I'm disappointed for a number of reasons. It kind of makes the game, it trivializes the game to some extent. I'm obviously winning, but I'd like it to be a bit of a game. And also, if they played the Archive, then I was intending to Vandal Blast, and now I can't. Your misplay messed up my Vandal Blast, dude. Anyway, it's fine. I'll untap my Mana Vault here, draw. We'll get some cards off of Tevesh, and then we'll see what we can do with Liliana to continue to dig into the hand. All right, so I draw for the turn. Go ahead and play Rog and draw 3. And I see Chandra, Rampage, land. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just play a land here. I can play Chandra. And then I'm going to make us both discard. And I don't need Culling the Weak. I think I'm okay on mana. So we'll trade a Culling the Weak for a... basically turn it into a Sinkhole for 0. I go ahead and add 2 mana to my mana pool with Chandra. With no real intent of using it. I just do that because I want to plus Chandra up. And I don't want to remove the top card of my library because I don't care about 2 damage, and I don't know what I'd be exiling. Could be something great. I could be exiling Necro or whatever. So we don't want to do that. All right, opponent top decks land. Obviously they have 1 card in hand. Fully expecting it to come down now. And it does. It's beautiful because with all the discarding of the lands, my opponent is 1 land short of actually activating this, and also because of the turn that we're on. Which means it's a beautiful time to Vandal Blast. Or by force, or whatever, right? It just gets so much of this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play Rog. The nice thing about having the extra artifact removal, of course, is that we've got the Torque in play, so we can kill something that way. Alright, Rog does his thing. Conchandra, and use the mana to play, we'll play an Amber here, and Ragavan with haste. I haven't played a land yet. I'll go ahead and swing in for 5, because the Lightning Greaves is going to go away, so I don't need to hold a blocker back. And I hit, looks like, Dragon Skull Summit from my opponent. I'm confused for a second. I forgot you can't play lands with Ragavan. Card's obviously no good if you can't do that. Useless creature. Alright, so I get a token. I'm clearly joking. Alright, so I'm going to plus up Liliana, and I decide to just let Vandal Blast go. I can buy force for cheaper. So we'll do that. And then I'm going to, oh boy, replay Rog here, using all my mana, and be done. And I'll charge this up for the turn, and then that way, the reason I replayed Rog is that I'm intending to Diabolic Intent next turn and finish this game off. But my opponent's had enough, and, you know, yeah, the game is certainly, I mean, the best thing they could do is draw Necro here, right? And then I charge this up, the Necro, they draw 7, and then on my turn I intent. Then they could potentially counterspell, right? But if that doesn't happen, outside of that, I mean, and it would depend on what I drew, but outside of like a Necro right there, I just intent for Death Cloud and go Cloud, and the even if my opponent has a Necro, the game would be over. They would have, assuming that I pushed it through or they didn't have a counterspell, they would lose 7 cards in hand. So they would pay 7 life, going to 26. I would attack for 3. Possibly 5 if I wanted to do Ragavan rather, Rag. So then they would drop to 23. The Death Cloud would go off for 7. They'd drop to 16. And then shortly after that, I could, they would have to pay, they would have no cards in hand, so on their turn they'd do nothing, and then they'd pay 7 life to get 7 cards. So then they would drop to 9 at that point, still having no lands in play because they don't get them till the end of their turn. And so you can see the problem here. At that point, I've got Chandra out, Tevesh Szat's ticking up, gonna steal their commander, and they're at 9 life with a Necro and no other permanents. So yeah, perfectly fine for them to scoop there. I guess the other thing they could have drawn would have been like a Time Twister. Then they wouldn't be in a Necro trap, but still. Either way, they didn't draw, Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune, Necro, something to get back in that game. Grist the Hunger Tide is being played by Great Liar, and this is a creature that, or a commander that I guess it is a creature, that I find to be, sometimes, very interesting. Sack a creature to destroy target creature or planeswalker? Hell yeah, sign me up for that. I would love to put that in this deck. It's too bad it's green and black, and not like just black and 1 or something. That would be nuts, super cool. But, alas, not going to be able to play it. This is a card I will forget about this card, and I need to keep in mind that it exists, because I think it would make a ton of sense in a deck that is using those colors. I think this is probably a planeswalker worth playing, just for the simple fact that you can nuke any creature or planeswalker. I mean, it depends on the rest of the contents of your deck, but being able to do that is pretty fantastic. So anyway, I've got a slow hand, but I've got some disruption, I've got some acceleration, I've got other disruption here. It's probably good enough. Opponent mulligans to 6, and yeah, I lead off with a little bit of fast mana. Opponent plays Boseiju and Llanowar Elves. Alright, so we're going to do remember what I said, Collective Brutality, often a 2-for-1. I could save, because I have Shatter Skull Smashing, but this delays their commander by a whole turn. So let's see what's in their hand and kill their elf, and do it with a creature here. And fortunately, this is nice. I get to take out Toxic Deluge. I get to see what's in my opponent's hand. I get to kill their elf, and I traded a Smoldering Marsh for a Toxic Deluge, which is acceptable. but also for information. All right, so my opponent plays a swamp, and on my turn I drew Dark Ritual. So we'll go ahead and play Rog now, Ritual, and get the commander down, draw some cards. Whoop. And man, we're all set with Plunge here. We got Strip Mine, we get to strip their land here. We'll take out their green, make it harder for them to find a way to back into the game, and my opponent, realizing that there is no way back into the game, goes ahead and concedes. So very nice here. You can see we would have had a chance to play one of the new cards and do some shenanigans, but unfortunately we get the scoop instead. That is just fine. All right, Guy Fieri Ball is the next opponent, and this opponent is running a Kirk, Son of Yawgmoth. And this card is another really big offender, honestly, in the command zone. I think this card is pretty insane. It literally requires you to generate 4 colorless, and that's it. This is, if Tevesh Szat gets banned, this card is in the running for another card that you might potentially run as a black commander. Now the bad thing is, while this thing does produce a boatload of mana potentially, it does not produce cards like Tevesh Szat does. So I do not believe it's stronger, but it has the potential to be much, much stronger. Like, you can ritual this thing down and then have the right cards in your hand and just puke out a victory. But it is not like self-contained as an engine. It's more of an enabler. So it's not like Tevesh Szat that's an engine that draws a bunch of cards. So with that in mind, I mean, my hand is just gross, right? So we're going to keep this, and I even won the die roll. So it's just a matter of sequencing now. So opponent mulligans to 6 also, which is pretty bad. I mean, I've got deflecting swat. This is just a house of a hand. So we'll go ahead and lead off with Rog to get the swat on board, and then Duress. And I see this interesting combination: Peat Bog, which makes two mana Shizo and a black. So there's 4 mana there. Dark Petition, a little bit slow for now. Font of Agony. So whenever you pay life, it's an enchantment. So when you pay life, you put blood counters on it, and then you remove 4 of them to kill a creature. And then this thing, which is the flip land. Choose target creature, you lose 2 life. Creature dies when dies, return it to the battlefield, and it's a land that comes into play tapped as a swamp. So interestingly enough, because this land is on the spell side, I can actually duress a land out of their hand here. And I think about it, and I realize that what I really want to do is I really want to mind twist my opponent's entire hand. And if I let them have what they can play here, the enchantment, the first turn play, then my opponent's going to draw to 7, play a land, go down to 6, play the enchantment, and go to 5, and I can mind twist darn near everything else in their hand. So, I actually, for 4, well, I'm going to duress a card. So what I do is I take the one that's a land on the flip side, and I leave them with these 5 cards here. So if you run through, so we'll see how it goes. So my opponent basically takes the bait, runs out their Font of Agonies, and so you notice they have a draw phase. They have exactly 4 cards, and I've got 4 mana. So this is perfect. This card's really nuts in their deck, or could be. But it ends up kind of hurting my opponent because it sets them up for a Mind Twist turn, and then my opponent concedes. And so that's, their hand ends up being this, and they die. And it's because, I was able to take a land out of their hand and then essentially trick them into playing the font, which is pretty cool, I thought. Other than that, it's a Mind Twist hand. What are you gonna say? All right, Jay Passon is the next opponent, and Jay Passon is playing Animatu, the Fate Shifter, and this is what I was talking about before about Workshop and Power Stone. About Power Stone just basically letting you have certain opening hands, making them a little more crazy than they have any right to be. It's the reason that I'm trying to keep the card in the deck. It's not a 33rd land. We have 31 lands plus the Shatter Skull. But the reason this isn't a 33rd land, for example, or something else, is just because of how many different sort of really nasty things you can do if you happen to draw the right combination of cards with this early on. And this is, of course, one of those games. And I believe Yeah, I win the die roll. I think I played Shop Power Stone and they scooped, or maybe they just scooped because they didn't want to face the deck. So unfortunately, didn't get a game there, but you get to see the reason for the Warren Power Stone still being in the deck, right? Why we want to try to retain it. All right, and I believe this is a good game. So I'm playing against Zozu the Punisher, or rather Brass Skylar running Zozu the Punisher, and have a heck of an interesting hand here. It looks like it's going to be a disruption and then go fast and win the game. I mean, this seems great. I'm going to keep this 100%. Opponent starts off with Lotus into Zozu. Very interesting. Very eager to get their damage going. I'm not super worried about it. I actually decide to go ahead and play into it, mainly because I can get my tapped land here, and I'm also protected against the strip mine, so I'd rather do that. Opponent plays a land and attacks me for 2. It has no follow-up, so we'll go ahead and get the tap land. I gave some thought to getting a basic swamp just because the next thing I could see out of my opponent's hand might be something along the lines of what's it called? Blood Moon, right? A Blood Moon effect. But anyway, I'm going to take some more damage here and get set up. My opponent's got 5 cards, so to him it's good, but it's not necessarily great. But setting up with a Grim here and then following up with a big turn into Lotus, him to Torok Commander is great. So we'll do that. Wait a turn. And then the tenor of the game changes a little bit. And my opponent's Seething Song, so they ritual out. Oh no, what is it going to be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it a Planeswalker? Yeah, it's a Planeswalker. And it's a very messed up one against my hand, right? It's Karn. So, brutal. Can't tap my Monolith for mana. Alright, opponent attacks for damage. And cool, I have a Lotus that doesn't do anything. And another Lotus that doesn't do anything. So, see it here first, folks. Lotuses are terrible in Magic. Alright, anyway, I'm going to, of course, play Duretti here. It does give me a way to take this off the board with useless artifacts. So, question is which one to use. For now, I decide just use the one that my opponent knows about and not reveal the fact that I have another drop here. And I go ahead and play Rog. This is strictly to prevent Duretti from getting killed by a creature with haste. And we'll go ahead and pass. Now, this could backfire if my opponent like Wheel of Fortunes, but otherwise, probably okay. They run out of Liquid Metal Torque. And interesting, cool. I don't see people play this too often. I drew Collective Brutality. That's nice because I can kill Zozu later. It doesn't seem super useful right now. I'm 1 mana away from just ritualing out my commander and moving on with this game. Eventually just working around Karn fairly easily at that point, or it should be. But I'm not there yet. So it doesn't click yet that I need Cabal Ritual to be in Threshold mode, and I'm assuming I'm going to find some mana here soon. So for now, what I do is I hymn my opponent for the last 2 cards in their hand, and I get Court of Ire. Like, holy crap, that is a scary card. Makes my opponent a Monarch, and then they get to deal 7 damage per turn to any target, or 2 if I steal Monarch from them. Still 2. Gross. And how do you steal the Monarch when something's just kadunking your guys for 7 every turn? In fact, how do you stay in the game? Super scary. The other card they discard is Pyromancer Goggles. Not exactly scary. This is a big investment for an artifact that taps for red, right? Anyway, glad to see all that go. I'm going to go ahead and play Jeweled Lotus here and try to pinch my opponent's mana a little bit further. With the Lotus, that was the sneaky play that I have here, and not much else I can do. Alright. I mean, I could have done it with Byforce, I suppose, but this is fine for now. I can hide the Byforce. Opponent plays a Meek Stone. Creatures of power 3 or greater don't untap, so pretty much doesn't affect me for the most part. Draw a Springleaf Drum that won't do anything, so I go ahead and just make a token, play the drum, just because of mana efficiency reasons and pass. Still don't have that mana. I just need 1 so I can play my commander. Opponent decides to play Furnace of Wrath. So if a source would deal damage to any basically all damage is doubled for the rest of the game. Yeah. To both my opponent and to me. And then they just plus up Karn and pass. My turn, Coalition Relic. Are you kidding me? Alright. Well, I'll just play that. And my opponent gets a Mana Vault out. They're probably also frustrated because they haven't found a way to capitalize yet. For some reason, uses the Mana Vault to play Zozu here. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I drew a Grief. It's a good Grief, but it's not a great Grief. Alright, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and kill Zozu, and I haven't picked up on the fact mentally that I need to get my Cabal Ritual active. I'm still thinking I'm going to draw mana for some stupid reason. So I don't sack one of my artifacts here, which is silly. I sack one of my constructs, thinking, you know, hey, I'll keep some ammunition in play. I could also have played Grief there with the ritual and then tried to go, like, use Grief to eventually attack Karn down. Of course, I'd have to kill the Meekstone at some point. But it just felt like a bit of a waste here, because what I'm expecting my opponent to do with a Furnace of Wrath running in a Mana Vault is tap 4 mana to untap this, rather than take 2 damage per turn. And then when they do, they should be sitting with a card in hand. So next turn, if I want to do the Grief play, that's what I'll do. But they don't for some reason. They just take 2. I don't know if they realize that they're taking double damage, or they just don't care, or what. They draw Urza's Saga here and pass. Drew a super useful Death Cloud. They've got a super useful Karn over there. So make a guy. Pass. Again. Opponent takes 2 more again. I totally don't understand this. I guess, well, they're going to use Saga. So they use it main phase. Another strange play. Of course, creature will get stuck under a Meekstone if they swing in. So it's not a huge threat, but I would like it to not be there. Finally, I've got a turn where it's like, okay, what do I do here? So for one thing, I can Grief to get a card into the graveyard. Grief himself. I could potentially collect a Brutality and discard a card. And put multiple cards in the graveyard. So there's a lot of ways that I can actually get up to threshold here. But I do want to be careful about where I invest my resources. It's possible that I want to ritual out the Sorin, and maybe I don't need to go all that trouble to get threshold. I just ritual out the Sorin. I also have By Force, which I can use to, you know, potentially get another card in the graveyard. So there's a lot of ways I can do that. But the question is, how do I best utilize all of my resources and my very limited mana? So I decide, first of all, I'm going to kill the construct token. I finally realize, hey, wait a minute. I'm not that far away. So I do that. And then I just decide to pass for the turn. I think this is probably a mistake. I should have Griefed here and got whatever's in their hand out of their hand. And then that way I would have had 6 cards with the Grief in the graveyard. The next turn I could Coalition Relic, rather than doing it this turn. But I think that on my mind was like, well, they might just activate Saga again, and if they do that, they leave 2 cards in their hand. There's a chance that the correct play for me is just to like Grief, Duretti away something, and then get a giant ritual going and just Death Cloud, right? And so that's kind of why I held off, because I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to run it. Well, for my opponent's turn, they play a Mana Crypt, also another great card when you've got Furnace of Wrath. Opponent's at 30, and I haven't even touched them yet, right? And boy, I really wish that I'd played the Grief last turn. Probably would have had the Mana Crypt or the Chandra in hand. Maybe not, because they have one other card in hand, but this is depressing. So now they get a Chandra down, and this is getting quite scary, because Chandra, they can exile the top card of the library. They exile a Faithless Looting. They don't play it, and then I take 4 damage to Furnace of Wrath. So this is, I'm on a big clock all of a sudden. And of course there's that construct over there. Oh, I'm sorry. They didn't have a Mana Crypt in hand. They fetched it with Urza's Saga. So it's possible they had Chandra in hands. They might not have. There's no way to know. Anyway, I draw Diabolic Intent. Okay, what do we do here? I have so many problems to deal with, and still I cannot seem to draw mana that isn't an artifact. So I realize the first thing to do is play the Grief. So I do that, and we'll take Repercussion, a basically useless card out of my opponent's hand. If only I'd played it last turn and hit Chandra instead, this would have been a lot easier. Alright, so I've got 6 cards in the graveyard. I need 1 more in the grave in order to have Cabal Ritual be active. And then I only get 1 shot. Like, I better make it count, you know, because I can't Ritual into Lotus and have it do anything with a Karn out. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just attack the construct here. They have no cards in hand, so I feel it's, you know, I'm willing to leave the Crypt in play for another turn. I'll deal with it if I have any mana left over or whatever, but definitely going to Cabal Ritual. And so this is it. I've got 5 mana. And I decide the best thing I can do here is just hit land. So let's play my commander. We'll play Tevesh Szat. and draw 3 cards and then see where we're at from there. And thankfully, I draw my first land of the game. And it's Urza Saga, which is a great one. Not as great with the Karn, but still pretty good. Because I'm hoping to get rid of Karn soon. So the next thing I need to do is, of course, deal with... I have Karn and Chandra, and I've got Furnace of Wrath ticking down. These are all big threats. But it's a matter of what do I want to address first. And, of course, they have a Crypt with lots of mana out, which is also scary. So I decided the first thing I'm going to do is just tutor. I'm going to take a chance. Hope they don't, Wheel of Fortune or top deck something gross. And I'm going to go get Anger's Rampage. So this gives me... I cannot target one of their Planeswalkers. But either way, either one, both pretty good to see go away. So I'm hoping that I can kill a Planeswalker next turn and then maybe get into this game. Opponent, for their turn, still leaves their Mana Vault untapped. Takes 2 more mana. Doesn't take 6 from their Crypt, but yeah. Anyway, for their turn, pluses up Karn and makes a huge misplay. Now, the worst thing about the play I made was that I was assuming that what my opponent would do is plus up the Meekstone. They would target the Meekstone. They would attack Duretti, and I would lose Duretti here. I figured that was going to happen. I didn't really see a way around it, and I have so much removal in my hand that I figured I was probably okay. Like, it was probably, like, Duretti had probably done its job. I think my opponent, like, screws up here or something because they actually play the Reveal effect, and, of course, that does nothing. I have no idea what's going on there. But every turn they've used the until next turn make a thing an artifact creature until this turn, so they know about it. They've pushed that button 5 times now. So I don't know what happened there. Anyway, for their turn they play a tapped Star Compass and pass for the turn. And they used Chandra to shoot. I had the 1/1 blocker. They used Chandra to shoot it. And I figured, like I said, they would attack. They would then Meekstone Duretti away, but they don't. And this is going to be the only chance they get. So we're going to... now I can make a robot that has no abilities other than attacking Planeswalkers here. So that is certainly an option. I drew Inquisition for the turn. I'm not going to take advantage of that. All right. Anyway, for my turn, I'm going to Rampage. We're going to see what gets sacrificed. And that's going to kind of inform my decision. Of course, it does mean that I can't make a Saga token here. But let's see what dies. My opponent chooses to kill Karn. I'm like, thank goodness. All right, so I'm going to use the rest of my mana here. I'm going to go ahead and make a construct. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I? Oh, yeah. So I make a construct, and I use Tevesh Szat. And I find Dark Ritual Necropotence off the 2 cards. So I was planning to just buy Force the Mana Crypt or the Star Compass and call it good. But with the Dark Ritual, I get to Ritual into Sorin, and then Sorin out a Vampire, which is great. So now I actually have a way to pressure this Chandra, and my opponent, gets to look at the top card of their library or whatever. But hey, this is awesome. I'm kind of taking a beating over here, right? Opponent does not again untap their Mana Vault, and wins another Crypt flip. Uses Jaws and uses Chandra, revealing a mountain. So that's fine. What is the last card in their hand? Extraplanar Lens. So their mountain's now tapped for even more mana. And at this point, we know that this game is just about over now. I'll go ahead and float some mana and sack the Saga to go get a functional Soul Ring. Sorin into a basic Swamp. Go ahead and play said Swamp. Run out a Gilded Lotus. I've been bricking on this entire game. Make a Defender. Make Thralls, and remember, all damage is doubled, so when I attack, well, first things first, let's Vandal Blast my opponent down to a manageable 3 mountains, and then when I attack with Vampire, I get to attack Chandra, and it is, all damage is doubled, so it deals 4. I gain 4 points of lifelink and kill the Chandra with 3 health on it, and now I'm all moded up, and outside of Wheel of Fortune into something sick. I think this game's about over. Or maybe like Jessica's Will. Opponent does get to destroy 5 of my mana there with a by force. So, and I barely got to use any artifacts this game at all. In fact, all my artifacts were just cannon fodder for Duretti. Pretty much. However, despite that, my opponent really has not much going on. And of course, I'm gonna actually spit out This is an interesting one because I actually really, I can hit him for 4 and gain 4 life here and start plussing Sorin up. And if you notice, Sorin's -7 is 13 damage to any target. So if I can get Sorin up to 4, 5, 6, 7, I could -13 it and deal 26 to my opponent and gain 26 life. Or I could just make more vampires and just chip away, dealing double damage to my opponent with the vampires here. So either way, however we're going to slice it, this game was over. And it was a very interesting one, I thought, though. All right, and finally we have this last game against Rograkh. I think I need to shrink the size of this window. I was thinking it'd be easier to see, but forgot about how it would cover up cards once you get more than 7 cards. And so as I was like, it doesn't cover up cards, but once you get more than 7, which Tevesh Szat is quite liable to do, yeah, oops. And unfortunately, my opponent just says something about they don't want to play against Tevesh Szat, and they scoop. I don't blame them. Obviously, this is a very solid hand, right? Once again, the Chalice just being better than a land here, where we fetch, we play Chalice on 2, most likely, and then Karn on 3, and then from there we Confidant, start getting our cards back, or alternately, Confidant on 2, and then we can wait on the Chalice for a bit if we need to. But more than likely, just for safety's sake, you would tend to run out the Chalice first and then run it and then get that Karn down. So then you don't have to worry about a Lotus or a Soul Ring off the top or whatever, doing something gross. So, nice hand. No way to test it, unfortunately, in that last game. But, yeah, overall, those are the changes to the deck. So hopefully you have enjoyed watching, and hopefully you've seen where your suggestions have or have not made an impact on the deck. And I've definitely tried to, I've certainly read every comment, thought about every suggestion, and tried to address as many as I can. And that's where we're at. So it's still evolving. The deck is a little dirty, in terms of like, you definitely feel like you are Darth Maul and not a Jedi when you're running this deck. I use that one because since his color scheme was black and red. But anyway. Yeah, you definitely feel like more of a Sith than a Jedi when you're playing this deck. But unfortunately, it certainly still has room for players. It certainly has room for skillful decisions. It certainly can have long games, as you saw against Mono Red of all things. It can certainly have fast games. So I think it does ultimately end up being interesting, but maybe not as much as Brea, just in the decision-making tree. I don't want to play this forever. I'm really hoping that it gets banned. I'm really hoping Partners gets banned or nerfed or something, because they desperately need to be nerfed or banned. All Partners, all of them. It's not just Tevesh Szat. We can replace this with other partners, and it's the same thing. It's just, it's too many resources, too deterministic, too available, too good. But that's a problem for another day. And until then, let's just keep pushing with pushing this deck as hard as we can to be as gross as we can, and hopefully demonstrate why something needs to be done about the ban list. Something needs to be done about Partners. Something needs to be done about really, really stupid cards that make commanders a little bit too good. Just something needs to be done. But until then, have fun playing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.